The words, "You'll never do better than me," still echo in my skull like a taunt from hell. But let me tell you something, karma has a twisted sense of humor, and I'm about to prove just how spectacularly wrong my ex-boyfriend was. His name was Marcus, and for 3 years I thought he was the love of my life. God, what a fucking joke that turned out to be. I should have known something was off when he started coming home later and later, always with some bullshit excuse about work or the gym or helping his buddy move for the 4th time that month. My gut was screaming at me, but I kept pushing those thoughts down, telling myself I was being paranoid. Trust your instincts, ladies. They're usually right. The discovery happened on a Tuesday. Isn't it always a Tuesday when your world falls apart? I'd forgotten my phone at home during lunch break and came back to grab it. The house was supposed to be empty. Marcus was supposedly at some important client meeting that would run all afternoon, but his car was in the driveway. My heart started doing this weird fluttering thing, like a bird trapped in a cage. I remember thinking maybe he was sick, maybe he'd come home early with a migraine. Sweet, naive me, always looking for the innocent explanation. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open slowly, calling his name softly so I wouldn't startle him if he was sleeping. The living room was empty, but I could hear sounds from upstairs. Muffled voices. A woman's laugh. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. I should have turned around and left. I should have protected myself from what I was about to see. But some masochistic part of me needed to know. Needed to see with my own eyes what I'd been trying so hard not to believe. The stairs creaked under my feet as I climbed toward our bedroom. Each step felt like walking through quicksand. The sounds got clearer. Marcus's voice, low and intimate, saying things I hadn't heard him say to me in months. And that laugh again, high and breathy and so fucking familiar it made my skin crawl. I reached the bedroom door, which was cracked open just enough to see inside. And there they were, Marcus and Jessica, my best friend since college, my maid of honor at the wedding we'd been planning. The woman who'd helped me pick out lingerie just last week, who'd listened to me worry about whether Marcus still found me attractive, who'd assured me that all couples go through rough patches. They were tangled in our sheets, in our bed, her red hair spread across my pillow like spilled wine. He was touching her the way he used to touch me, back when he gave a damn, back when I was enough. My legs went weak. I gripped the doorframe so hard my knuckles went white, and I'm pretty sure I stopped breathing for a solid 30 seconds. The world tilted sideways, and for a moment I thought I might actually pass out right there in the hallway. But then Marcus looked up and saw me. The expression on his face wasn't guilt or shame or even surprise. It was annoyance. Like I was interrupting something important. Like I was the one in the wrong. Jessica scrambled to cover herself, finally showing some semblance of shame, but Marcus just sat there, completely naked and completely unashamed, staring at me with this cold, calculating look I'd never seen before. Time stretched like taffy. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The air in the room felt thick and poisonous. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. His voice was flat, matter of fact, like he was commenting on the weather. He told me this had been going on for 8 months. 8 fucking months. While I was planning our future, picking out china patterns and booking venues, he was screwing my best friend behind my back. He said he'd been trying to figure out how to tell me, but I'd been so clingy lately, so needy. He said Jessica understood him in ways I never could. She was more spontaneous, more adventurous, more fun. The words hit me like physical blows. Each one landed with surgical precision, designed to cut as deep as possible. But the worst part? He wasn't done. He stood up, still completely naked, and walked toward me with this smug confidence that made my blood boil. He leaned against the doorframe, blocking my view of Jessica, who was desperately trying to get dressed behind him. That's when he said it. The words that would haunt me for weeks and ultimately fuel everything that came after. He looked me dead in the eye and told me I should be grateful he was ending things now, before I embarrassed myself further. He said I was too vanilla, too predictable, too ordinary. He said he'd been settling for me, and now that he'd found someone who actually excited him, he couldn't pretend anymore. And then, like a knife to the heart, he delivered the final blow. "You'll never do better than me, Sarah. You should remember that when you're lonely and desperate and wondering why no one else wants you." The cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. This was someone I'd loved, someone I'd trusted with my deepest fears and insecurities, and he was weaponizing all of it against me. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't think. The world had narrowed to just his voice and that fucking smirk on his face. Jessica finally managed to get dressed and slipped past me without making eye contact, muttering something about how sorry she was and how she never meant for it to happen. The front door slammed behind her a moment later. Marcus didn't even watch her go. He was too busy staring at me, waiting for me to break down, waiting for me to beg or cry or plead with him to reconsider. Instead, I turned around and walked back downstairs. I grabbed my phone and my keys and walked out of that house without saying a word. Got in my car and drove to the nearest coffee shop, where I sat in the parking lot and tried to process what had just happened. The first wave of emotion was pure, overwhelming grief. I felt like someone had died, and I guess someone had. The version of myself that trusted blindly, that believed in happily ever after, that thought love was enough to overcome anything. She was gone and she wasn't coming back. I cried until my eyes were swollen and my chest ached. I called in sick to work and spent the rest of the day in that parking lot, feeling sorry for myself and wondering how I could have been so stupid. But grief is a funny thing. It doesn't stay pure for long. Other emotions start creeping in around the edges: anger, humiliation, and something else I didn't recognize at first. A cold, calculating fury that felt almost foreign in its intensity. By evening, I'd moved past the tears. I was thinking clearly for the first time in hours, and what I was thinking was this: Marcus had made a serious fucking mistake. He thought he'd broken me. He thought I'd curl up in a ball and disappear quietly, maybe send him a few pathetic texts begging him to come back. He thought he could discard me like yesterday's garbage and move on with his life without consequences. But Marcus had forgotten something important about me. Something he'd overlooked during all those months of taking me for granted. I don't stay down when someone knocks me over. I get back up and I get even. The plan started forming in my mind as I sat there in that parking lot, watching the sun set through my windshield. It was just a seed at first, a tiny spark of an idea that made me smile for the first time since I'd walked into that bedroom. Marcus wanted to play games? Fine, I'd play games. But I was going to win. I drove home as the sky turned dark, and Marcus was gone, probably at Jessica's place, celebrating his newfound freedom. The house felt different now, like it belonged to someone else. Nothing looked the same. Even the furniture seemed foreign. I walked through each room, touching things that had once been ours and were now just mine. The couch where we'd watched movies. The kitchen table where we'd planned our future. The bathroom where I'd practiced saying my wedding vows in the mirror. All of it felt like artifacts from someone else's life. I poured myself a glass of wine, the expensive bottle we'd been saving for a special occasion, and sat on the couch with my laptop. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I needed to know exactly who I was up against. And more importantly, I needed to figure out how to destroy them both. The research phase began that night. I started with social media, scrolling through months of photos and posts, looking for clues I'd missed. There they were, hidden in plain sight. Inside jokes in comment sections, tagged locations that overlapped, photos where they were both present but trying to look casual about it. How the fuck had I missed all of this? But as I dug deeper, I found something interesting. Something that made my smile widen and my pulse quicken with anticipation. Marcus had a brother, an older brother named David, and David was everything Marcus wasn't. David Martinez was everything his younger brother Marcus pretended to be. While Marcus worked some mid-level sales job and drove a leased BMW he couldn't actually afford, David owned 3 successful restaurants across the city. Where Marcus was all flash and borrowed confidence, David was quietly self-assured. And Jesus Christ, where Marcus was conventionally handsome in that basic white boy way, David was absolutely fucking gorgeous. I'd met him exactly twice during my relationship with Marcus. Both times at family gatherings where Marcus had seemed almost embarrassed by his older brother's presence. Now I understood why. David made Marcus look like a discount version of himself, like someone had tried to photocopy perfection and run out of toner halfway through. The first time I met David was at Marcus's parents' anniversary party 2 years ago. He'd shown up late, apologizing profusely about some crisis at one of his restaurants, and I remember thinking he had the most genuine smile I'd ever seen. He was taller than Marcus, broader in the shoulders, with the kind of confidence that comes from actually accomplishing things instead of just talking about them. His hair was darker, his jawline sharper, and when he laughed, really laughed, not the forced chuckle Marcus used in social situations, it was like music. Marcus had been weird about it all night, constantly interrupting whenever David and I were talking, steering conversations away from his brother's success. At the time, I'd thought it was just sibling rivalry. Now I realized it was insecurity. Marcus couldn't stand the idea that someone might prefer his brother's company to his own. The second time was at Christmas last year. David had brought a date, some stunning brunette who worked in marketing, and Marcus had spent the entire evening making subtle digs about David's bachelor lifestyle. How he was too picky, too focused on work, how he'd never settle down because he was too selfish to commit. The irony of that last comment was almost funny now. I remembered how David had handled Marcus's petty comments with grace, never rising to the bait, never fighting back. He'd just smiled and changed the subject, asking about our wedding plans with what seemed like genuine interest. He'd even offered to cater the reception at cost, saying he wanted to do something special for his little brother. Marcus had declined immediately, claiming he wanted something more upscale, something that would impress his colleagues. The look that had flashed across David's face, hurt, disappointment, resignation, had lasted maybe half a second before he'd covered it with another smile and said he understood. Now, sitting in my living room with my laptop and that bottle of wine, I was seeing everything through new eyes. Marcus hadn't just been unfaithful. He'd been systematically cruel to everyone around him, including his own family. The man I'd thought I loved was actually a narcissistic piece of shit who couldn't stand anyone else's success. But David? David was different. And if my instincts were right, David was exactly the kind of man who would appreciate being treated well. The kind of man who would notice when someone valued him for who he was, instead of what he could provide. I spent the next 3 hours researching everything I could find about David Martinez. His restaurants had glowing reviews across every platform. He'd been featured in the local food magazine twice. His Instagram was tasteful and professional, shots of beautiful dishes, restaurant interiors, the occasional photo with his staff celebrating some milestone. No shirtless gym selfies, no pseudo-inspirational quotes about grinding and hustling. Just a man who was proud of his work and the people he worked with. More importantly, his relationship status was listed as single. The brunette from Christmas was nowhere to be found in recent photos. According to a brief article from 3 months ago, he'd recently ended a long-term relationship and was focusing on expanding his business. Perfect fucking timing. The plan that had been forming in my mind started taking real shape. It was elegant in its simplicity, devastating in its potential impact, and absolutely guaranteed to hit Marcus where it would hurt most, his ego. I was going to seduce his brother. Not just sleep with him, but actually win him over. Make him fall for me. And then, when the moment was right, I was going to marry him. I was going to become David's wife and Marcus's sister-in-law, and I was going to spend the rest of my life being everything Marcus said I'd never be, happy, successful, and completely fucking better than him. The beauty of it was that it wouldn't just be revenge. David was genuinely attractive, genuinely successful, genuinely kind. If I could make this work, I wouldn't just be getting back at Marcus. I'd be upgrading my entire life. But I couldn't rush it. This had to be perfect. Natural. Believable. If David suspected for even a second that I was using him to get back at his brother, the whole thing would collapse. I needed to make him fall for me because he wanted to, not because I was manipulating him. Which meant I needed to become the kind of woman David would want. I needed to study him, understand what attracted him, what made him tick. I needed to transform myself into his perfect match. I started with the obvious stuff. His social media showed him at wine tastings, art gallery openings, charity events. He was cultured, sophisticated, involved in the community. Marcus had always preferred sports bars and action movies. David appreciated the finer things in life. I could work with that. I'd always been interested in art and culture, but Marcus had made me feel pretentious whenever I suggested we visit a museum or try a new restaurant. He'd preferred chain restaurants and Netflix binges. I'd compromised so much of myself to fit into his world that I'd almost forgotten who I used to be. Time to remember, the physical transformation came first. Not because I needed to change myself for a man, but because I needed to feel confident again. Marcus's words were still echoing in my head. Vanilla, predictable, ordinary. I was going to prove him wrong on every fucking count. I booked a consultation with the most expensive hairstylist in the city. Cut off 8 inches of hair and added subtle highlights that brought out the green in my eyes. The stylist, a gay man named Francisco who had zero patience for self-doubt, told me I had gorgeous bone structure that had been hidden under too much hair. He was right. The new cut was sleek, sophisticated, and made me look like someone who belonged at gallery openings and wine tastings. Next was the wardrobe. I'd been dressing like Marcus's girlfriend for so long I'd forgotten how to dress like myself. Conservative blouses, boring slacks, everything designed to blend in at his company functions. I threw it all away and started over. Elegant dresses that hugged my curves, well-tailored blazers that made me look powerful, shoes that were both beautiful and expensive. I wasn't trying to look like someone else. I was trying to look like the best version of myself. The transformation wasn't just external. I enrolled in a wine appreciation class at the local community college, started visiting art galleries on weekends, read restaurant reviews and food blogs until I could discuss flavor profiles and cooking techniques with some authority. I wasn't faking interests. I was rediscovering parts of myself that Marcus had slowly eroded over 3 years, and it felt fucking amazing. For the first time in months, I was excited about getting dressed in the morning. I looked forward to trying new things, meeting new people, expanding my horizons. I'd forgotten how good it felt to challenge myself, to learn something new. Marcus texted me exactly once during those first 2 weeks. A pathetic message asking if I was ready to talk about dividing up our things. I ignored it. Let him wonder what I was doing, where I was, how I was handling the breakup. Let him assume I was falling apart without him. The reality was the opposite. I was becoming more myself than I'd been in years. And I was getting ready to destroy him in the most poetic way possible. The opportunity came sooner than I'd expected. Francisco mentioned during one of my follow-up appointments that he'd heard about a charity auction for the children's hospital. High-end event, lots of local business owners, great cause, the kind of thing David would definitely attend. I bought a ticket immediately. $800, but it was an investment. I picked out the perfect dress, deep blue silk that made my eyes look like emeralds, cut just low enough to be interesting without being obvious. I practiced my smile in the mirror until it looked natural. I researched the charity and the cause until I could speak about it passionately and knowledgeably. The night of the auction, I felt like a different person. Confident, beautiful, purpose-driven. I'd become someone worthy of David's attention, and more importantly, I'd become someone Marcus would never recognize, someone he'd underestimated and dismissed. I arrived fashionably late, scanning the room for David's familiar silhouette. The venue was gorgeous, a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and crystal chandeliers, filled with the kind of people who actually made a difference in the world instead of just talking about it. And there he was, near the bar, talking to an older couple with animated gestures. He looked incredible in his tailored black suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, his face lit up with genuine enthusiasm for whatever he was discussing. This was a man in his element, comfortable in his own skin, radiating the kind of quiet confidence that couldn't be faked. I took a deep breath, channeled every ounce of the new woman I'd become, and started walking toward him. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't from nerves. It was from anticipation. This was the beginning of Marcus's downfall, and he didn't even know it yet. The older couple moved away just as I reached the bar, and David turned to order another drink. That's when he saw me. His eyes widened slightly, and I watched recognition dawn on his face, followed immediately by surprise, then something that looked like appreciation. He smiled, and it was just as genuine and warm as I remembered. When he said my name, there was a question in his voice, like he couldn't quite believe I was there. I explained that I was supporting the charity, that I'd always cared about children's causes but hadn't been involved before, that I was trying to be more active in the community. The conversation flowed naturally from there. He introduced me to several people, a gallery owner, a fellow restaurant owner, a woman who ran a nonprofit for homeless veterans. Everyone was interesting, accomplished, passionate about their work. This was the world I wanted to be part of. This was the life I wanted to build. David stayed by my side throughout the evening, including me in conversations, making sure I felt comfortable and welcomed. He was attentive without being possessive, charming without being fake. When I mentioned I'd been taking wine appreciation classes, his face lit up with genuine interest. When I asked knowledgeable questions about the art pieces being auctioned, he looked impressed. This wasn't Marcus's world of surface-level networking and strategic schmoozing. These people actually liked each other. They were building something together, creating positive change in their community. And David was at the center of it all, not because he was trying to impress anyone, but because he genuinely cared. The auction itself was incredible. I bid on a weekend at a local spa and won, which gave me the perfect excuse to seem spontaneous and fun. David bid on a dinner for 8 at one of the city's best restaurants and won, then immediately offered to let me help him plan the guest list for a dinner party featuring local artists and entrepreneurs. As the evening wound down, he walked me to my car. The conversation had been so natural, so easy, that I almost forgot this was supposed to be strategic. Almost forgot that I had an ulterior motive. For a few hours, I'd just been a woman having an amazing time with an incredible man. But then he mentioned Marcus, just casually, asking how his little brother was doing, saying he hadn't heard from him in a while. The reminder hit me like a cold splash of water. This wasn't just about having a good time. This was about revenge. I kept my expression carefully neutral and told him that Marcus and I had recently ended our engagement, that it had been amicable but we'd grown apart, that I was focusing on myself now, exploring new interests, building a life that made me happy. The concern in David's eyes was immediate and genuine. He asked if I was okay, if there was anything he could do. He said he was sorry to hear about the breakup, that he'd thought Marcus was lucky to have found someone like me. If only he knew how unlucky Marcus was about to become. I thanked him for a wonderful evening and gave him my number when he asked. Told him I'd love to help plan that dinner party, that I'd enjoyed meeting his friends, and would love to get more involved in the community. As I drove home, I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and guilt. The evening had been perfect, better than perfect. David was everything I'd hoped he would be and more. Kind, intelligent, successful, connected to a world of interesting people doing meaningful work. But I was lying to him, using him, planning to manipulate his feelings for my own purposes. The guilt lasted about 30 seconds, until I remembered Marcus's words, "You'll never do better than me." Until I remembered the smug satisfaction on his face as he destroyed everything I'd believed about my life, my future, my worth. David deserved better than being used as a pawn in someone else's revenge plot. But Marcus deserved everything that was coming to him. And if I could give David the love and appreciation he deserved while simultaneously destroying his worthless brother, maybe everyone would win in the end. Except Marcus. Marcus was going to lose everything, and he was going to know exactly why. The next morning, David texted me. He'd had a wonderful time at the auction and hoped we could get together soon to discuss the dinner party. He suggested lunch at one of his restaurants, not as a business meeting, but as a chance to continue our conversation from the night before. I stared at the message for a long time, my finger hovering over the keyboard. This was it. The point of no return. Once I said yes, once I started down this path, there would be no going back. Marcus's face flashed in my mind. That cruel smile. Those cutting words. The casual way he'd dismissed 3 years of my life, my love, my future. I typed back immediately. I'd love to have lunch. I was free tomorrow if that worked for him. His response came within minutes. Perfect. He'd make a reservation for noon and send me the address. He was looking forward to it. So was I. More than he could possibly imagine. Lunch with David was supposed to be strategic. A calculated move in a carefully orchestrated game of chess. What I hadn't counted on was how genuinely fucking amazing he would be. Not just attractive or successful, but actually interesting, actually kind, actually everything his piece of shit brother pretended to be. His restaurant, Meridian, was the kind of place Marcus could never afford to take me. Exposed brick, Edison bulb lighting, the smell of fresh herbs and garlic in the air. David met me at the entrance personally, not because he was trying to show off, but because that's apparently just who he was. Hands-on, attentive, someone who gave a damn about details. He'd reserved a corner table that felt private without being secluded, the kind of spot where you could have a real conversation without feeling like you were on display. As we sat down, he asked about my weekend, my work, my thoughts on the auction. Not the surface-level small talk Marcus specialized in, but genuine curiosity about my opinions and experiences. The food was incredible. David had ordered a selection of his favorite dishes, things that weren't on the regular menu, chef's specials that showcased what his kitchen could really do. He explained each dish with passion, talking about the local farms he sourced from, the techniques his chef used, the story behind each recipe. This wasn't just a meal, it was a fucking experience. But what really got to me was how he listened. When I mentioned my wine appreciation class, he didn't just nod politely. He asked about my favorite varietals, shared stories about the vineyard partnerships he'd developed for his restaurants, suggested places I might want to visit. When I talked about getting more involved in community work, he lit up with genuine enthusiasm, connecting me with 2 different organizations that could use my skills. This was what it felt like to be with someone who actually valued your thoughts and interests, someone who wanted to help you grow instead of keeping you small. 3 hours passed like 30 minutes. By the time we were sharing dessert, a chocolate souffle that was basically edible sex, I was in serious danger of forgetting why I was there. David was making me laugh, making me think, making me feel like the most interesting woman in the room. It had been so long since anyone had made me feel that way. When he walked me to my car, he hesitated for a moment before asking if I'd like to have dinner later that week. Somewhere nice, he said. A proper date. Not business, not charity work, just the 2 of us getting to know each other better. I said yes without hesitation. And for the first time since this whole plan started, I wasn't thinking about Marcus at all. The dinner date was at a small Italian place David knew, family-owned, the kind of restaurant where the owner's grandmother's recipes were still being used. He'd called ahead to make sure they had my favorite wine, remembered from our conversation at lunch. He'd also worn a dark green shirt that brought out the gold flecks in his brown eyes, and I caught myself wondering if he'd chosen it specifically because I'd complimented his eyes the night of the auction. We talked for 4 hours, about everything and nothing. His dreams for expanding his restaurant empire, my abandoned plans to go back to school for my master's degree, the places we wanted to travel, the books we'd read, the movies that made us cry. He told me about growing up in the shadow of his parents' expectations, always being compared to Marcus, who was supposedly the social one while David was just the serious one. The irony was fucking incredible. Marcus had always acted like he was the golden child, the one with all the charm and potential. But listening to David, I realized that their parents had actually been playing favorites in the opposite direction. They'd pushed David to be responsible, to build something lasting, while letting Marcus coast on his looks and superficial charm. No wonder Marcus resented his older brother. When David talked about his past relationships, I could see the pattern. Women who'd been attracted to his success, but not interested in the work it took to build it. Women who'd wanted the lifestyle, but not the man. He'd been used and discarded just like I had, in different ways but with the same result. Cautious, guarded, afraid to trust that someone might actually want him for who he was. By the time he walked me to my car again, I was in serious trouble. This wasn't just attraction anymore. I was starting to actually care about David Martinez. Not as a tool for revenge, but as a person. A man who deserved better than what he'd been given. A man who deserved to be loved completely and without reservation. When he kissed me goodnight, soft, tentative, like he was afraid I might pull away, I felt something I hadn't expected. Guilt. Real, stomach-churning guilt about what I was doing and why I was doing it. But then I got home to the house I'd shared with Marcus, to the bed where I'd found him with my best friend, and the guilt evaporated. David might be collateral damage in this war, but Marcus had started it. Marcus had chosen to be cruel, to be heartless, to destroy someone who'd loved him completely. Whatever happened next, he'd brought it on himself. The relationship with David developed faster than I'd expected. We started texting constantly, not the superficial bullshit Marcus used to send, but real conversations about our days, our thoughts, our dreams. He'd send me pictures of new dishes his chef was experimenting with, asking for my opinion. I'd send him articles about local art events, knowing he'd appreciate the recommendation. 3 weeks after our first date, he invited me to a soft opening for his newest restaurant. Not as his date, he was careful to clarify, but as someone whose opinion he valued. He wanted me to experience the space, the menu, the atmosphere, and tell him what I thought. He trusted my judgment. When was the last time Marcus had trusted my judgment about anything? The restaurant was stunning, modern but warm, with an open kitchen that let you watch the culinary magic happen. David had put his heart and soul into every detail, from the locally sourced ingredients to the custom-designed light fixtures. This was a man who created beautiful things, who contributed something meaningful to the world. I spent the evening watching him work the room, greeting investors and food critics and fellow restaurateurs with genuine warmth. He introduced me to everyone as his brilliant consultant, crediting me with suggestions I'd barely remembered making. He made me feel like a partner, not an accessory. Halfway through the evening, he pulled me aside. There was something he needed to tell me, he said. Something he probably should have mentioned earlier but hadn't known how to bring up. My heart stopped. Had he figured out my connection to Marcus? Had someone told him about the breakup? About what had really happened? But it wasn't that. It was worse in a way. He was falling for me, he said. Falling hard and fast in a way that scared him. He hadn't been looking for a relationship, hadn't been ready to trust someone new, but I'd changed everything. He wanted to be with me, really be with me, not just casually dating, but building something real together. The sincerity in his voice, the vulnerability in his eyes, it was everything I'd been hoping for and everything I'd been dreading. Because I was falling too. Despite my plans, despite my motivations, despite everything I'd told myself about using him for revenge, I was genuinely falling for David Martinez. That night, I went home with him. Not because it was part of the plan, but because I wanted to. Because when he touched me, when he kissed me, when he whispered my name like a prayer, I felt more alive than I had in years. He made love to me like I was precious, like I was something to be treasured and protected, like I was enough, more than enough. Afterward, lying in his arms in his gorgeous downtown loft, I let myself imagine what it would be like to be with him for real, to build a life together based on genuine love and mutual respect. To wake up every morning next to someone who appreciated me, who encouraged me, who made me laugh and made me think and made me feel like the best version of myself. It was a beautiful fantasy, but it was still a fantasy. Because even if my feelings for David were real, even if what we had was special, it had started with a lie. And lies, no matter how well-intentioned, have a way of poisoning everything they touch. I was in love with David Martinez, and I was going to destroy him. The first crack in my perfect plan came 6 weeks later. David and I had been inseparable, spending every free moment together. He'd started talking about introducing me to his parents, about taking a weekend trip to wine country, about the future in a way that made my chest tight with longing and terror. We were having dinner at his place. He'd cooked because apparently he wasn't just a successful restaurateur, but also an incredible chef, when his phone rang. He glanced at it, frowned, and apologized. It was Marcus. He hadn't heard from his brother in months, and he was worried something might be wrong. I watched David's face change as he listened to whatever Marcus was saying. Concern, confusion, then something that looked like hurt. He glanced at me several times during the conversation, and I knew with sinking certainty that my secret was out. Marcus had found out about us. Somehow, some way, he'd discovered that his ex-fiancée was dating his brother. And being Marcus, he'd immediately called David to poison the well. When David hung up, he sat in silence for a long moment. Then he looked at me, and I could see the questions in his eyes, the doubt that hadn't been there 5 minutes earlier. He asked me directly, had I been engaged to Marcus? Had we really broken up just 2 months ago? Had I known David was his brother when I approached him at the charity auction? I could have lied. Should have lied. Told him it was a coincidence, that I'd been trying to move on and had no idea of the family connection. But looking at his face, seeing the trust and openness that had drawn me to him in the first place, I couldn't do it. I told him the truth. All of it. The affair, the breakup, the cruel words that had driven me to seek revenge. My plan to seduce him, to make Marcus jealous, to prove that I could do better. I told him about the research, the transformation, the calculated approach to winning his affection. But I also told him about the part I hadn't planned for, how I'd fallen for him completely and genuinely, how being with him had reminded me who I was, who I could be, how he'd made me feel valued and appreciated and loved in ways I'd never experienced before. I told him I loved him, not as part of some scheme, not as a tool for revenge, but because he was the most incredible man I'd ever met, because he deserved to be loved completely and without reservation. Because even though our relationship had started with a lie, what I felt for him was the most honest thing in my life. David listened to the entire confession without interrupting. When I finished, he sat in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, he spoke. He said he needed time to think, to process what I'd told him, to figure out if we could build something real on a foundation that had started with deception. He asked me to leave, not angrily, not cruelly, but with a sadness that was somehow worse than anger would have been. He said he cared about me, that he believed my feelings were real, but he needed space to figure out what that meant. I left his apartment knowing I'd probably lost the best thing that had ever happened to me. And the worst part was, I deserved it. I'd gambled with something precious, and I'd lost. But Marcus wasn't done with me yet. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, all from Marcus. He'd heard about David and me, and he was absolutely fucking furious. How dare I use his family to get back at him? How dare I drag his brother into our personal drama? How dare I try to manipulate someone as good and decent as David for my own petty revenge? The hypocrisy was breathtaking. The man who'd cheated on me with my best friend, who'd destroyed my trust and my future plans, who'd told me I'd never do better than him, was lecturing me about morality and decency. But his anger told me something important. My plan was working. Marcus was terrified that I might actually end up with David, terrified that I might actually prove him wrong, that I might actually do better than him. The texts kept coming throughout the day. Threats, insults, demands that I stay away from his family. He was going to tell David everything about what a psycho I was. He was going to make sure everyone knew what I'd done. He was going to destroy me the way I was trying to destroy him. I ignored them all. Let him rage and threaten and spiral into the kind of fury that would make him do something stupid. Because Marcus angry was Marcus careless, and Marcus careless was exactly what I needed. 3 days later, David called me. His voice was careful, controlled, but I could hear something underneath that made my heart skip. He wanted to see me, to talk. There were things he needed to say, things he needed to ask. We met at a coffee shop neither of us had been to before. Neutral ground. He looked tired, like he hadn't been sleeping well. That made two of us. He'd been thinking about what I'd told him, he said. About the lies and the truth and the complicated mix of motivations that had brought us together. He'd talked to his parents, to his friends, to his therapist. He'd tried to figure out if what we had was real or just an elaborate manipulation. His conclusion surprised me. He believed that my feelings were genuine. He believed that whatever had started as revenge had turned into something real and meaningful. But he also believed that I needed to finish what I'd started with Marcus. Not for revenge, but for closure. For my own peace of mind. He'd been thinking about Marcus too, he said. About their relationship. About the patterns he'd seen growing up. Marcus had always been jealous. Had always resented David's success. He'd undermined David's relationships before, had said cruel things about the women David dated, had made it clear that he thought his older brother didn't deserve happiness. David had spent years trying to maintain a relationship with Marcus out of family loyalty, but he was starting to realize that Marcus didn't want a relationship. Marcus wanted a punching bag, someone to blame for his own failures and insecurities. What I'd told him about the breakup, about the affair, about the cruel words Marcus had used, it fit a pattern David had been seeing his whole life. Marcus taking and never giving back. Marcus hurting people and then playing the victim when they fought back. So David had a proposal. He wanted to be with me, really be with me, but he wanted to do it right. He wanted us to start over, to build something honest and real. But first he wanted to help me get the closure I needed. He wanted to help me destroy Marcus. The plan we came up with together was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential impact. We would announce our engagement at the family dinner Marcus's parents had planned for the following weekend. We'd tell everyone that we'd fallen in love, that we were planning to elope, that we wanted the family's blessing for our unconventional romance. Marcus would be trapped. He couldn't object without looking like a jealous ex or admitting to his parents that he'd cheated on me. He couldn't claim I was using David for revenge without revealing what he'd done to deserve revenge in the first place. He'd have to sit there and smile and pretend to be happy for us while watching his brother get everything he'd told me I'd never have. But the real beauty of the plan was that it wouldn't just be revenge. David and I were going to make it real. We were going to actually get married, actually build a life together, actually prove that love could triumph over cruelty and manipulation. We spent the week planning every detail. I moved my things out of the house I'd shared with Marcus and into David's loft. We met with a wedding planner to arrange a small ceremony for the following month. We picked out rings, booked a honeymoon, started talking about the future in concrete terms. It felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. A life where I was valued and appreciated and loved. A life where I was enough, more than enough. The night before the family dinner, David and I lay in bed talking about what would happen the next day. How Marcus would react, how his parents would respond, how our lives would change once we made this public. I asked David if he was sure about this, if he was ready to deal with the fallout from his family, the complications of marrying someone who'd been engaged to his brother, the messy reality of building a relationship on the ashes of my previous one. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to face me, his eyes serious in the dim light. He said he'd never been more certain of anything in his life, that whatever had brought us together, whatever complications lay ahead, He wanted to face them with me. That I was the best thing that had ever happened to him, and he wasn't going to let his brother's jealousy or his parents' potential disapproval or anyone else's opinions keep him from the woman he loved. The woman he loved. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. Because I loved him too. Completely, genuinely, with every fiber of my being. And tomorrow I was going to marry him. Marcus was going to learn that I'd done better than him. Much, much better. And the best part? There was nothing he could do to stop it. The family dinner was held at David's parents' house, a sprawling suburban home that screamed, "We've made it," without being obnoxious about it. The kind of place where family photos lined the hallways and the smell of home-cooked food filled every room. David's mother, Elena, had prepared enough food to feed a small army, and his father, Roberto, had opened a bottle of wine that was probably worth more than Marcus's monthly car payment. Marcus arrived 20 minutes late, which was typical for him, always making an entrance, always needing to be the center of attention. He walked in with Jessica on his arm, both of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. The sight of them together still made my stomach clench, but not with the devastating pain I'd expected. Instead, I felt something closer to pity. Looking at them now, through the lens of my relationship with David, I could see how shallow they both were, how desperate for external validation, how empty without someone else to define them. Marcus's face when he saw me sitting next to David was fucking priceless. Confusion, then recognition, then a flash of something that looked like panic. He'd known we were seeing each other, but seeing us together in his parents' house, in his childhood space, made it real in a way that clearly unsettled him. David's parents were gracious hosts, welcoming me warmly despite the obvious awkwardness of the situation. They asked about my work, my interests, my family. They treated me like a person worth knowing, not like Marcus's discarded ex-girlfriend who'd somehow wandered into their home. Throughout dinner, I watched Marcus struggle to maintain his composure. He kept glancing between David and me, clearly trying to figure out our relationship status. Were we just friends? Were we dating? How serious was it? The uncertainty was eating him alive, and I was loving every second of it. David was perfect. Attentive without being possessive, including me in conversations, making sure I felt comfortable and welcomed. He'd catch my eye across the table and smile, and I'd feel that flutter in my chest that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with genuine affection. After dinner, as Elena was clearing the plates and Roberto was opening another bottle of wine, David stood up. He cleared his throat and asked for everyone's attention. He had something important to share. The room went quiet. Marcus looked up with poorly concealed dread, like he knew what was coming and was powerless to stop it. David reached for my hand, pulling me to my feet beside him. His fingers intertwined with mine, and I could feel the slight tremor in his grip. He was nervous, but he was also determined. He told his family that he and I had fallen in love, that despite the unconventional circumstances, he glanced at Marcus here, acknowledging the elephant in the room without making it the focus. We'd found something real and meaningful together, something worth fighting for. Then he dropped to one knee. Even though I'd known it was coming, even though we'd planned every detail, my heart stopped. The ring was gorgeous, a vintage setting with a stone that caught the light like captured fire. Not the flashy, oversized diamond Marcus had picked out, but something elegant and timeless. Something chosen specifically for me. David's proposal was simple and heartfelt. He said he'd never expected to find someone who understood him so completely, who challenged him and supported him and made him want to be better. He said he wanted to spend the rest of his life making me as happy as I made him. I said yes, of course. The tears in my eyes were real. The joy in my voice was genuine. Whatever this had started as, it had become something beautiful. The reaction around the room was immediate and telling. Elena burst into tears of happiness, pulling me into a hug that smelled like vanilla and acceptance. Roberto clapped David on the back, welcoming me to the family with genuine warmth. They were thrilled that their son had found love, even if the timing was complicated. Marcus, on the other hand, looked like he'd been punched in the gut. His face cycled through shock, anger, and something that might have been grief. Jessica gripped his arm, her knuckles white with tension. When Elena asked about wedding plans, David and I exchanged a look. We'd decided to elope, we said. Something small and intimate, just the two of us. We were thinking next month, maybe sooner. We didn't want to wait. That's when Marcus finally found his voice. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He couldn't fucking believe this, he said. His voice was tight with barely controlled rage. How long had this been going on? How could David do this to him? David's response was calm and measured. He reminded Marcus that I was no longer his fiancée, that Marcus had made his choice and would have to live with the consequences. He said he was sorry if the situation was uncomfortable, but he wasn't going to apologize for falling in love. Marcus's composure cracked completely. He started yelling about betrayal, about family loyalty, about how I was just using David to get back at him. He said I was a manipulative bitch who'd stop at nothing to hurt him. The room went dead silent. Elena gasped. Roberto's face darkened with anger. Even Jessica looked embarrassed by Marcus's outburst. David stood up slowly, his jaw tight with controlled fury. He told Marcus that he was out of line, that he needed to apologize immediately or leave. He said that whatever problems Marcus had with me, he had no right to speak to any woman that way, especially not in their parents' house. But Marcus wasn't done. He turned to me, his eyes blazing with hatred. He said I thought I was so fucking clever, didn't I? I thought I'd won some kind of prize, but David would figure out what I really was eventually. He'd see through my act and realize he'd been played. And when that happened, when David inevitably left me, Marcus would be there to pick up the pieces of his brother's broken heart. The words hung in the air like poison. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then David stepped forward, positioning himself between Marcus and me. His voice was low and dangerous when he spoke. He told Marcus that he was done. Done with the jealousy, done with the cruelty, done with watching his brother hurt everyone around him. He said Marcus had thrown away the best thing that had ever happened to him, and now he was bitter that someone else had found happiness. He said I was twice the person Marcus would ever be, and he was proud to marry me. He said if Marcus couldn't accept that, couldn't find it in himself to be happy for his brother, then maybe they didn't need to be family anymore. Marcus left without another word, dragging Jessica with him. The front door slammed behind them with a finality that echoed through the house. Elena apologized to me, tears streaming down her face. She said Marcus had always been troubled, always jealous of David's success. She said she was ashamed of how he'd behaved, how he'd spoken to me. She said I was welcome in their family, that she could see how much David and I loved each other. We stayed for another hour, talking about wedding plans and future holidays and how we'd met. I told them a carefully edited version of the truth, that we'd connected at a charity event, that we'd bonded over shared interests and values, that we'd found something special together. By the time we left, I felt genuinely welcomed into the Martinez family. Not as Marcus's ex, not as a consolation prize, but as David's chosen partner. As someone valued for who I was, not who I used to be. 3 weeks later, David and I were married in a small ceremony at the courthouse. Elena and Roberto were there, along with a handful of David's closest friends. The ceremony was simple but perfect. Two people who loved each other making a commitment to build a life together. As we exchanged vows, I thought about the journey that had brought us here, the betrayal that had shattered my world, the anger that had driven me to seek revenge, the unexpected love that had transformed everything. Marcus never contacted us again. I heard through mutual friends that he and Jessica had broken up within a month of our wedding. Apparently, the stress of the situation had revealed cracks in their relationship that had always been there. Shocking, I know. A year later, David and I are ridiculously happy. We've bought a house together, adopted a dog, started talking about kids. His restaurants are thriving, and I've gone back to school to finish my master's degree. We travel together, laugh together, dream together. We've built something real and lasting and beautiful. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Marcus had never betrayed me. If he'd been faithful, if we'd gotten married, if I'd never discovered what a piece of shit he really was. The thought makes me shudder. I would have spent my life with someone who didn't value me, who didn't see my worth, who made me smaller instead of bigger. Marcus was right about one thing. I would never do better than him. I did infinitely better. I found someone who loves me completely, who respects me, who makes me feel like the most important person in the world every single day. The revenge I'd planned turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because I'd hurt Marcus, though I'd be lying if I said that wasn't satisfying, but because it led me to David, to real love, to a life I'd never imagined possible. Marcus probably thinks he destroyed me when he cheated. He probably thinks he broke something that could never be fixed. But the truth is, he set me free. He forced me to see my own worth, to fight for my own happiness, to refuse to settle for less than I deserved. So thank you, Marcus, for being exactly the kind of man who would cheat on his fiancée with her best friend. Thank you for being cruel enough to show me what I was really worth. Thank you for being too stupid to appreciate what you had. Because you're right, I'll never do better than you. I already have.